I still remember the sound of the applause. Polite, restrained, almost rehearsed. It wasn't for me. It was for the man firing me. After 32 years of showing up before sunrise, holding the company through recessions, mergers, and board shakeups, I stood under the cold glare of fluorescent lights, as my name was erased from the digital wall of legacy leaders. The man who replaced me smiled as if he'd just done something noble. Effective immediately, Mr. Walter Kane will be stepping down from his position as executive director, announced the CEO, Mark Leston, the same man who once called me his mentor. My mouth went dry. The conference room was packed. Executives, board members, even junior analysts I'd trained years ago. Some looked away. Some whispered. A few recorded on their phones, thinking I didn't notice. 32 years reduced to a sentence. I joined Leston Dynamics when it was a 2-room operation above a printing shop. Back then, Mark was the founder's son. A restless 24-year-old with charm but no patience. I taught him everything about contracts, clients, and the value of trust. I was there when his father retired and Mark took the reins. I defended his impulsive decisions when the board questioned his judgment. I was there when he divorced, when he rebuilt. And now I was there, being cut off like a liability. He didn't even look at me as security approached. Just said, "It's time for new energy, Walt. The merger needs a fresh vision. A fresh vision." That's what they called Betrayal now. The merger he mentioned, the one that had been in the works for 8 months, was supposed to be historic, a $950 million deal with a multinational firm, Triarch Holdings. I had led every negotiation, every draft, every late-night call with their CFO. I knew the numbers like I knew my own heartbeat. But 3 weeks before final signing, Mark began holding closed-door meetings. I wasn't invited anymore. The tone of the office changed. Whispers when I entered, sudden silences when I passed. Then, the morning of my termination, he called for a company-wide update. That's when it happened. He didn't just fire me. He performed it. "Walter's loyalty has been appreciated," he said to the room, resting a hand on my shoulder like a priest giving last rites. "But moving forward, we need leadership that aligns with Triarch's global direction." Loyalty. He said it like it was a flaw. I stared at him, speechless. The presentation screen behind him flickered with the company's new slogans. "Tomorrow starts without yesterday." I didn't even get to clear my desk. HR had already packed my things into a cardboard box with my name misspelled. That evening, I sat in my car outside the building. Engine off, watching the last employees leave. My reflection in the windshield looked like a ghost trapped between glass and night. I'd spent my life keeping that company alive, and now it was moving on as if I'd never existed. Still, something didn't sit right. As I scrolled through my work tablet, one they'd forgotten to deactivate, I noticed something strange. The new merger documents Mark had uploaded hours before my firing were different. Pages missing. Clauses changed. A new signatory I didn't recognize, C. Radner. A Triarch didn't have a Radner. A knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't about a fresh vision. It was about a cover-up. The next day, my inbox exploded. News outlets ran headlines like, "Leston Dynamics announces mega merger with Triarch Holdings." Mark was smiling in every photo, shaking hands with people I'd never seen. But then, 48 hours later, whispers started spreading online. By day 3, the 950M merger had collapsed. Triarch had pulled out completely. Stock prices plummeted 62% overnight. And in a poetic twist of timing, Mark's face vanished from the company site just as mine had. But that's not where the story ends. Because the truth behind that merger, the reason it collapsed, was something only I knew. And I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. When I think back now, the first red flag wasn't the late-night meetings or the missing reports. It was the tone in Mark's voice. He'd started calling me "old school." Not as a joke, as a warning. It began 6 months before my firing. We were deep in the preliminary talks for the Triarch merger, and the atmosphere inside Leston Dynamics felt like a high-voltage wire ready to snap. I had worked through countless negotiations before. Acquisitions, partnerships, joint ventures. But this one felt different. Faster. Sloppier. And Mark was different too. He'd always been ambitious, yes. But this time his ambition came wrapped in secrecy. Meetings would pop up on his calendar at odd hours, tagged, confidential. He stopped copying me on key emails, even when legal documentation needed my review. And when I'd ask about updates, he'd brush me off with that disarming grin of his. Relax, Walt. You've been doing this for decades. Let me handle this one my way. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he was talking to a relic. I tried to rationalize it. CEOs change. Strategies evolve. Maybe Mark was just feeling the pressure. After all, the Triarch deal was supposed to be his legacy. $1 billion handshake that would catapult Leston Dynamics into global recognition. But deep down, something felt off. One evening, around 10:30 p.m., I was still in the office reviewing vendor contracts when I heard voices from the glass conference room across the hall. Mark's voice. And another man's. Sharp, unfamiliar, foreign accent. When I peeked through the glass, Mark was sitting with a tall man in a navy suit. They were reviewing printed spreadsheets, but when I caught Mark's eye, he quickly slid the papers into a folder. Walt. Burning the midnight oil again? Ha. He laughed a little too loud. The man beside him gave a tight nod, said nothing, and left within a minute. Who was that? I asked casually, pretending not to notice the tension in Mark's shoulders. Consultant from Triarch. Nothing to worry about. Just legal technicalities. I'd been the company's legal liaison for years. There were no consultants I didn't know about. That was red flag number 2. A few weeks later, I noticed a new name popping up in interdepartmental memos: Claire Radner. She was supposedly an international advisor for the merger. Yet, I never saw her in a single meeting, never received a single email from her, and couldn't find her name on any Triarch directory. When I brought it up to HR, the department head stammered. Oh. Mr. Laston said she's working remotely under Triarch's side of things. Cross-border protocols, you know. I nodded, but my instincts screamed otherwise. You don't build a $950 million merger on phantom consultants. Then came the financial oddities. I was reviewing quarterly expenditure when I noticed irregular budget allocations. A series of miscellaneous transfers, labeled strategic realignment. The amounts weren't small. Or $2.4 million redirected in one quarter to a shell department that technically didn't exist. When I confronted the finance director, she grew visibly nervous. Those came straight from the CEO's office. Walter, I can't discuss internal executive authorizations. I felt my stomach twist. I'd signed every major deal for decades, but now my signature was suddenly missing from all recent approvals. Someone had deliberately rerouted authority around me. That's when I realized I wasn't being excluded. I was being phased out. Still, I couldn't believe it was betrayal. Mark had stood beside me through funerals, through my wife's illness, through the company's near collapse in 2008. We'd fought battles together, toasted victories together. I'd treated him like a son. So I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Triarch was forcing changes behind his back. Maybe he was under pressure from investors. Maybe I was just paranoid. But denial only lasts until the facts start talking. In early January, I arrived at the office to find my parking spot taken by a silver BMW with a temporary visitor's pass. Inside, my nameplate had been quietly removed from the executive boardroom door. In its place was a sleek silver plaque. Strategic Growth Division Head, C. Radner. I froze. Claire Radner. The ghost from those documents. I walked straight into Mark's office. He was on a call but waved me in with that effortless, infuriating confidence. Walt, I was just about to talk to you. Things are changing fast with Triarch. New structures, new roles. You'll still be part of the leadership circle, of course, but we need flexibility. Globalization. You know? Flexibility. I repeated. You're replacing me with someone who doesn't exist. He laughed. Actually laughed. You've always been dramatic. Claire's very real, she's based in Zurich. Let her prove herself before you judge. And then he did it. He reached across the desk, patted my hand, and said, "Don't worry, old friend. You've done your part." That phrase echoed in my head for weeks. You've done your part. It sounded like a goodbye he wasn't ready to say out loud. As the merger talks intensified, My access to confidential files was quietly revoked. The IT department claimed it was a system migration. Then my meeting invites began disappearing from my calendar. Entire project teams were reassigned without notice. And the worst part. Everyone noticed, but no one said a word. I'd walk into the cafeteria and conversations would stop mid-sentence. Junior analysts who once came to me for advice, now avoided eye contact. My phone stopped ringing. My inbox went silent. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. The stress started to eat at me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, replaying every conversation, every glance, every small lie I'd ignored. My doctor prescribed sleeping pills. My wife, Margaret, tried to comfort me, but even she could tell something inside me had cracked. "You gave them your life, Walter?" she said one night. "Don't let them take what's left." But it was already too late. They'd taken my peace, my dignity, my sense of purpose. 2 weeks before my firing, I overheard Mark's assistant on a call outside his office. She was whispering fast, urgent. "Yes, Mr. Leston said to finalize the Radnor accounts before the announcement. No. Don't send the documents through Walter. He's not looped in anymore." I'm not looped in anymore. I remember gripping the stairwell railing until my knuckles turned white. The pieces were falling into place. Mark wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself. And yet, I still didn't see it coming. I still showed up every morning, hoping that loyalty, history, and decency meant something. I still believed that after 32 years, I'd earned the benefit of the doubt. But in truth, I was standing on a trapdoor. One Mark had built, plank by plank, beneath my own feet. And soon, he was going to pull the lever. When betrayal finally shows its face, it never looks the way you expect. It doesn't come in a dramatic confrontation or a slammed door. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, through a misplaced file, a forgotten email, or a whisper not meant for your ears. For me, it came through an accidental email. A message meant for Claire Radnor. But sent to me. It was late on a Tuesday night, 2 days before the company-wide meeting that would end my career. I was in my home office, half distracted, trying to piece together financial statements for the merger, when a new email pinged on my tablet. Subject: Radnor clause finalized, transfer approval confirmed, from Mark. Leston Dynamics. Com to W. Kane Leston Dynamics. Com Els instead of C. Radnor Triarch Holdings. Che. For a second, I thought my eyes were deceiving me. The body of the email was short, clinical, terrifyingly clear. Claire. The shell accounts are now under your signatory control as discussed. Once the Triarch deal closes, we'll liquidate the holding entities quietly. Walter's access has been completely removed, so he can't trace the fund flow. We're in the clear. I froze. Shell accounts. Liquidation. We're in the clear. Every word felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I read it again, slower. My pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't incompetence. This was fraud. Mark wasn't merging the company. He was gutting it. For 32 years, I had been his shield. I signed off on contracts, vouched for his integrity, defended him in boardrooms. And now, he was using my reputation to launder millions through fake accounts under a made-up name. Claire Radnor. The fake advisor wasn't real. She was a digital mask. An identity created to funnel Triarch's pre-merger investments straight into Mark's offshore accounts. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen, the truth settling like ash in my lungs. It wasn't favoritism. It wasn't just secrecy. It was a heist, and I was the decoy. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was rage. I slammed my fist against the desk so hard that the coffee mug toppled, splattering across old documents. 32 years, gone. My reputation, my career, my loyalty, turned into a shield for his crimes. I paced the room, trying to calm myself, but my mind was spinning. I saw it all in a flash. The fake consultant. The legal technicalities. The hidden meetings, the off-record calls. He'd used my name to secure Triarch's trust, and once the deal closed, he'd cut me loose before the auditors traced the money. That was the plan all along. And now, I was the perfect scapegoat. The next morning, I returned to the office early, before sunrise. The halls were empty, the hum of the ventilation system the only sound. I walked into my office, my old office, and started searching. Emails, contracts, transaction logs, anything that could confirm what I'd seen. But my access had been wiped clean. Every folder labeled Triarch was locked behind an admin wall. Even my archived mail was missing. Then I noticed something odd on the side of my monitor, a small yellow sticky note. Handwritten. Not mine. It read, check local backups. Server B before they're gone. A no signature. Just those 10 words. Whoever left it knew what was coming. I hurried to the basement IT room. A place I hadn't stepped into in years. Old servers lined the walls, blinking lazily in the dim light. I logged into server B, typed my old admin password, thankfully still active, and began scanning the mirror backup, and there it was. A hidden folder labeled, CR'd accounts. Inside were PDFs, bank records, and offshore transfers totaling nearly 94 million. Each file was timestamped during the merger phase. Each one bore digital approval stamps from my email account. They were framing me. I felt dizzy. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the drive I used to copy the evidence. I stuffed it in my briefcase, shut the server down, and left the building before anyone else arrived. Driving home that morning, I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, my throat felt dry. I kept seeing Mark's face, that calm, confident smirk as he told me not to worry, that everything was under control. He wasn't just betraying me, he was burying me alive. By afternoon, my phone started ringing non-stop. First from HR, then legal, then Mark himself. I ignored every call. Finally, a text buzzed in. Mark, Walt, I heard there's been a misunderstanding about the merger documents. Let's talk privately. Please don't jump to conclusions. Misunderstanding. That word almost made me laugh. The audacity of it. The corporate smoothness of betrayal wrapped in PR language. I typed one word back: Walter. No. Then I turned my phone off. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the USB drive beside me. My wife watched me silently, knowing better than to interrupt. Finally, I whispered the truth aloud. He stole from the company, Margaret. Millions. He used my name to do it. She covered her mouth, eyes wide. My God. Walter, you have to tell someone. The board, the authorities. I can't, I said. Not yet. Because if I went to them now, with the evidence coming from my account, I'd be the one arrested. Mark had covered his tracks perfectly. He'd spent months removing my access, isolating me, discrediting me. No one would believe the old executive who couldn't keep up. I needed a plan. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was electric. Everyone was dressed sharp, smiles forced, eyes gleaming with anticipation. The company-wide meeting had been announced overnight. Whispers spread through the hallways. The merger was going public. But when I walked into the main conference hall and saw the stage set up, I realized what was about to happen. This wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. The lights dimmed. Mark stood at the podium, radiating confidence. Behind him, the company's logo shimmered on the big screen, next to Triarch's. He started his speech with all the charisma I once admired, thanking the team, praising the merger, talking about new era of leadership. And then, he called my name. I froze as every head turned toward me. Walter Kane has been a pillar of this company, Mark said smoothly. But as we move into a global future, it's time for a transition. Effective immediately, Walter will be stepping down to make way for new leadership. There it was. My public humiliation, wrapped in applause. He'd fired me in front of everyone. Before I could speak. Before I could fight back. Before I could show them what he'd done. That night, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot long after everyone had gone. My hands trembled as I stared at the USB drive. The faint blue light blinking like a heartbeat. Mark thought he'd buried me. But he'd forgotten one thing. I built this company from the ground up. I knew every audit trail, every signature protocol, every name that mattered. And if he thought I'd go quietly, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The morning after my public firing felt like waking up inside a nightmare that wouldn't end. The world outside went on as usual. Cars, traffic, sunlight through the blinds. But inside me, everything had stopped. 32 years. Gone. Just like that. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from coworkers pretending to check in. Journalists fishing for quotes. Even a board member wanting a comment on the transition. I turned it face down on the table. I couldn't bring myself to respond. I sat in silence, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at the stack of old company reports spread across my desk. My office ID card lay beside them. Laminated proof of a lifetime that no longer existed. Margaret came in quietly, still in her robe. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You didn't deserve this," she said softly. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Deserves got nothing to do with it," I muttered. But even as I said it, something inside me began to stir. That day, grief came in waves. Every corner of the house reminded me of that company. The framed award on the wall, Excellence in Leadership, 2010, the old blueprints of our first warehouse expansion I'd kept as a memento. Even the pen on my desk, engraved with Leston Dynamics, 25 years strong. I'd spent more time in those offices than in my own home. Built it brick by brick, late nights and early mornings, through recessions and layoffs. And for what? To be humiliated in front of everyone by the man I'd trained. I felt anger rising again, hot, raw, heavy. But under it was something worse, shame, not because of what Mark did. Because I had let him. I replayed every moment in my head, the subtle cuts, the excuses, the trust me, smiles. The way I had ignored my instincts. How many times had I told myself, he's like family? How many red flags had I rationalized away? That was the worst part of betrayal. It didn't come from enemies. It came from people you'd once taken bullets for. I stared at my reflection in the window, tired eyes, gray streaks in my hair. The face of a man who'd built everything for someone else's empire. And that's when it hit me. I'd been loyal to the wrong man. But I didn't have to die with his mistakes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into my home office, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the drawer where I'd stashed the USB drive. The one that held every piece of proof of Mark's fraud. The faint blue light blinked steadily, almost as if it were breathing. I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. The files opened instantly. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, offshore routing numbers, emails, contracts, all the fingerprints of his crime. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the digital evidence glowing back at me. This wasn't just about me anymore. He hadn't just ruined my life. He was about to destroy the company itself. If the Triarch merger had gone through, those shell accounts would have drained millions before anyone noticed. By the time auditors caught on, Leston Dynamics would have been bankrupt. And Mark long gone, hiding behind a web of fake identities and offshore trusts. He wasn't just a backstabber, he was a thief. And I was the only one left who could stop him. Margaret walked in quietly again. "You're still awake." "I can't let him win," I said. She sighed, sitting across from me. "You can't go back there, Walter. They humiliated you. They'll never listen now." I turned the laptop toward her, showing her the documents. "They'll listen to this." Her eyes widened. You kept it." "I didn't plan to," I said. "But someone wanted me to find it. Someone left a note in my office. Check server B before they're gone." Whoever that was, they knew what Mark was doing. Margaret studied me, her expression shifting from worry to quiet determination. "Then maybe you're not as alone as you think." That sentence hit me like a bolt of clarity. Not alone. For weeks, I'd been drowning in isolation, convinced I was powerless. But what if there were others? People inside the company who'd seen the same things I had, who'd noticed the same strange patterns. Mark had built his power on fear. But fear only worked if people stayed silent. And I was done being silent. The next morning, I woke up with something I hadn't felt in weeks: purpose. I shaved, dressed, and packed the USB drive in my jacket pocket. As I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the broken man from yesterday. I saw someone coming back to life. Before I left, Margaret placed a hand on my arm. "Whatever you do, Walter, don't lose yourself in this." I smiled faintly. "He already took everything else. That part's mine." My first stop was an old ally. Dana Ruse, the internal auditor who'd quietly helped me years ago during a corruption probe in the logistics division. She had always been sharp, ethical, and quietly brave. When she opened her apartment door and saw me, she froze. "Walter, what are you doing here?" "I got fired," I said simply. "And I need your help." We sat down, and I showed her the files. The further she scrolled, the paler she became. This is massive. Offshore accounts, forged authorizations, falsified expense codes. Walter, he's been siphoning money for months. I know, I said quietly. And he used my name. She looked up, shocked. They'll pin this on you. Unless you get ahead of it. I nodded. That's exactly why I'm here. I want to expose him. But I need to do it right. If I go straight to the press, they'll call it revenge. I need a chain of evidence. Proof no one can bury. Dana leaned back, thinking. I can help you trace the transactions. But we'll have to move fast. Once Triarch realizes the merger's unstable, they'll start pulling files. And Mark will cover his tracks. Then we moved tonight. As we worked through the evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Focus. For so long, I'd lived reacting to other people's decisions, defending, explaining, apologizing. But now every click, every decrypted file, every revealed signature was a step toward reclaiming control. The pain was still there. The humiliation, the betrayal. But it had transformed into something sharper. Purposeful. That's what pain does when you stop running from it. It becomes power. By midnight, we'd traced 3 of Mark's offshore accounts and identified 2 intermediaries. Dummy companies registered in Zurich and Singapore. Dana found that one of them was managed by a holding firm with a familiar name. Look at this, she whispered, zooming in on the registration data. Radner Consultancy AG. The fake name again. The ghost that started it all. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. He's not even hiding anymore. Dana gave me a look. You know what this means, right? You've got enough to destroy him. I exhaled slowly. Not yet. He destroyed my reputation in front of everyone. When I take him down, I'm going to do it the same way. Her eyes widened. Publicly? Exactly. As I drove home in the quiet hours before dawn, the city lights blurred past my windshield. For the first time since that humiliating meeting, I didn't feel powerless. I felt alive. Mark thought he'd written the final chapter of my story. But what he didn't realize was, he'd just given me the perfect opening line for his own downfall. Revenge, I learned, is less about theatrics and more about choreography. If you want to bring down a man who built a silk rope ladder to climb over the law, you had to cut the rope without anyone noticing until it was too late. Dana and I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop between us, the USB drive like a cold relic of truth. We sketched a plan that night, not a vengeful fantasy, but a series of surgical moves designed to expose fraud, protect the evidence, and make Mark's power evaporate in public view. Step 1. Lock the proof. We couldn't depend on company servers anymore. Mark had already rewritten permissions and sanitized logs. So our first move was simple and defensive. Copy everything to multiple secure locations. Dana helped me make encrypted clones of the files, mirrored to external drives we kept in separate places. I printed key pages, transfer ledgers, forged approval stamps, time-stamped emails, and photographed the paper trail. It felt like assembling an emergency kit for a person about to be accused of arson. Keep the proof close and undeniable. Step 2. Build a chain of custody. Evidence without provenance is just a rumor. If anyone challenged the files, they'd say I'd manufactured them. Dana, with her auditor's precision, taught me to create a chain of custody. We logged times, dates, and hash codes for every file copy. She notarized a statement at a small legal firm she trusted. No headline, just a piece of paper that would show a neutral third party had seen the documents and when. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. When the battlefield is paperwork, paperwork wins. Step 3. Identify allies. Quietly, Mark's control relied on silence. He had people on payroll and people afraid of losing theirs. So instead of shouting in the halls, we recruited quietly. Dana contacted 2 former colleagues who'd been reassigned without explanation, Priya in finance and Jamal in IT. Priya had noticed the odd transfers months ago but had been told to focus on projections. Jamal had been told to rewrite logs during system migration. Both felt used and scared, but when Dana showed them the files, fear turned to resolve. We promised anonymity and safeguards. We would only reveal names when it was legally necessary. Step 4. Corroborate the paper trail. documents meant little without corroboration. We mapped the transfers to intermediary accounts and reached out to a small forensic accountant, Dana, trusted from an old case. He ran the numbers and confirmed what the PDFs implied. Money had been routed through shell entities tied to a holding firm whose directors were straw names. Not only that, but timestamps showed approvals issued from locations inconsistent with Mark's presence. A sloppy digital fingerprint that screamed haste and arrogance. The accountant's report became the skeleton of our case. Step 5. Thread the needle. Triarch. If Triarch's board believed Mark, he'd survive. If Triarch believed us, Mark's house of cards collapsed. But Triarch was a fortress of lawyers. A clumsy accusation would be tossed and ignored. So we drafted a discreet, factual briefing for Triarch's compliance team. No drama, no rhetoric. Just the chain of custody, the forensic report, and a clear explanation of how the funds had been misrepresented as pre-merger investments. We sent it anonymously through an encrypted channel that would show an independent origin, but not betray our sources immediately. It was risky, but Triarch's auditors were the only ones capable of pulling their handshake away in public. Step 6. Control the narrative. A public fuse. The boardroom where I'd been humiliated was where Mark had staged his performance. He loved spectacle, he thrived on optics. So Dana suggested a counter. Play. Don't try to beat him privately. Force the problem into the light. But before any public move, we needed ironclad, irrefutable proof that couldn't be dismissed as one disgruntled ex-executive's story. The plan wasn't reckless exposure. It was a staged collapse. Triarch pulls, the stock tumbles, investors ask questions, and Mark's carefully laid excuses fall into a vacuum. Step 7. Bait without touching it. We also needed to make Mark feel secure enough to move. Arrogance is a useful weapon. He had to keep thinking he was in control, so he would continue signing things and making public moves that would create more traceable evidence. So we leaked nothing. Instead, we monitored. When Mark made his next public announcement praising the merger, Dana and I were ready to time the release of our briefing to Triarch so it would coincide with his speech. An engineered betrayal of his own stagecraft that would startle the right people at the right moment. Over the next 10 days we moved with the careful intensity of people defusing a bomb. We met Priya in a cafe, and she handed over internal transfer spreadsheets she'd secretly downloaded. Jamal, who still had one old admin token, exported shadow logs that showed who had changed permissions and when. The forensic accountant checked every wire transfer against bank registry, leaks he knew how to access. Each new piece fit like a cog in a gear we were winding tighter. But Mark still smiled at work. On the surface he was untouchable. Interviews, photo ops, proclamations about global growth. He continued to tower in company PR, a man untouched by whispers. That image was his last defense. Everyone loved the story of the visionary CEO. To the outside world he was still the architect of the 950M dream. To us, he was a man who'd pocketed a fortune on the strength of our reputations. And because he still felt in control, the stakes kept climbing. We had to be faster and smarter. One night, as Dana and I pored over a ledger that traced a $4.2 million transfer through 3 numbered accounts, my chest tightened. We had enough to make regulators take notice, but the timing mattered. Exposed too early and Mark would pivot. Exposed too late and he'd bury us in counterclaims. The plan had to be surgical and public. Margaret, quietly fierce, became our moral support and logistics runner, holding drives and attending a notarization meeting when I couldn't. Each small action tightened the noose, but with each tightening came a new heartbeat of fear. He still had friends on the board, he still controlled PR. He still had more money and lawyers than any of us. On the 13th day, the sequence we'd been rehearsing clicked into place. Triarch's compliance team, stunned by the forensic report and the chain of custody, called an emergency review. Within hours, Triarch's chief legal counsel informed Leston Dynamics that they were pausing the final signings, pending an internal probe. It was small. It was quiet. It was devastating. Stockholders noticed. Analysts started asking questions publicly. The share price wobbled. For the first time since the announcement, Mark's smile faltered in a photograph. But the worst was yet to come. Because Mark, feeling the ground shifting beneath him, did what cornered men do best. He struck outward. He called a press conference for the following morning to reassure investors, to paint the pause as procedural hiccup. He would try to recapture the narrative. We had only one chance to make sure that conference didn't reset his power. The next day would decide whether we'd merely delay him or end him. We'd gathered the proof, built a chain of custody, turned allies into a quiet army, and put the fuse within reach. Now we had to light it. The morning sun had no business shining on that day. It felt obscene, too bright for what we were about to do. But the world doesn't wait for righteous timing. It keeps going, and we had to catch up. Mark's press conference was set for 10. Cameras, lights, anchors, that specially polished calm CEOs cultivate before they lie. He'd rehearsed smiling lines about transparency, growth, and a temporary pause. He thought he could glass over the crack with optics. He didn't know the crack was already an avalanche. We did not go to the press first. That was Dana's insistence. Force, then exposure. Triarch's emergency pause had done half the work. Analysts were murmuring. Stock tickers flickered nervously. And Mark was about to take the stage to soothe a rattled market. That was our window. At 9:45 a.m., I walked into the ballroom where Mark would perform. I carried nothing on my person but a thin folder. I had been warned not to show up, to let the plan run on its own. But the last humiliation, the way he had terminated me on stage like a TV stunt, had taught me that some things needed a face, to face reckoning. Dana was already in the back row, eyes steady. Priya sat beside her, pale but resolute. Jamal hovered by the doorway, fingers on his phone, ready to livestream anything that happened to go wrong. Margaret had refused to come, but she'd driven my car to the lot and sat inside, the engine running as an insurance of escape she hoped we wouldn't need. Mark took the podium to applause. He smiled that practiced smile, warm, confident, invulnerable. Cameras rolled like hungry waves. Stock tickers quoted the press feed. He began with gratitude and then, like a surgeon, made the first incision into the truth. While Triarch's due diligence has surfaced procedural questions. He began, voice smooth. We remain confident. We are cooperating and expect this to be finalized within weeks. There it was, the classic CEO pivot. He wanted to calm the market. I rose from my seat. Heads turned. The hush was immediate, a physical blade. Mark's smile flickered. Walter, he said, practiced politeness cracking ever so slightly. Is there something you'd like to? I walked to the mic. Adrenaline was a steady, cold current. My voice felt stranger than I expected, calm, but iron, forged. Yes, I said. There is. I pulled the thin folder from my jacket and set it on the lectern. Cameras swung like hunting birds. This, I said, and held up a stack of printouts, is not my revenge. It's your evidence. I didn't scream. That's important. No shouting. No melodrama, just facts. Jamal's livestream had already begun. Dana released the encrypted briefing we'd sent to Triarch, but made it public in real time. Hash codes, notarization certificate, and the forensic accountant's report. Within minutes, every network and a dozen financial blogs had the packet. Priya walked up behind me and placed a laptop on the podium. The screen displayed transaction trails mapped on a world map. Zurich, Singapore, Cayman names flashing like landmines. Mark's face went pale enough to compete with his white collar. He lunged for control, for the narrative, for anyone to claim we were disgruntled ex-executives. This is an orchestrated smear, he said. Voice high now. Walter's angry. He was dismissed. Dana stepped forward, holding a notarized page. That page proves the chain of custody, she said. We logged access times. We have shadow logs that show who changed permissions and when. Jamal, you have the server backups. Jamal nodded and hit play. A recorded clip started, an internal call we had obtained where Mark, in his measured voice, spoke to an offshore liaison about routing, pre-merger escrow, through Radnor Consultancy AG and assuring them, we'll take care of Walter. The room felt like it had been plunged into ice. The reporters stopped asking soft questions. The anchors stopped their practiced interruptions and let the avalanche speak. Comments flooded the livestream, shock, disbelief, the slow, gleeful unspooling of a public fed up with polished power. Mark's lawyer moved. She pounded the podium with legalese. claims of forgery, of entrapment, of tampering with evidence. Her mouth kept going while the facts landed like hammers. The forensic accountant, quiet, reedy, unimpressive until now, walked to the microphone and spoke in the kind of slow, clinical cadence that clarifies accusation into verdict. He explained how hash verification worked, how our notarized timestamps matched server backups, how the wire transfers funneled through shell companies ultimately pointed to holding accounts registered to proxies on Mark's behalf. He named banks, jurisdictions, and the precise percentages siphoned. The numbers were small next to the moral arithmetic dozens of millions pilfered from the trust of employees and investors. Outside, the stock exchange reacted like an animal sensing blood. The share price wavered, then fell. On the podium, Mark's glare turned to pleading. Board members in the front row who had once applauded him now shifted in their seats, their faces masks of calculation and fear. The cameras panned to investors in the crowd scribbling and whispering. Then, the final blow. Triarch's legal counsel, who had been watching the livestream in another room, released a statement. Given new, credible evidence of financial impropriety, Triarch is immediately terminating all negotiations and will open an independent investigation. The timing was surgical. They had been waiting for proof to avoid liability. Their withdrawal was a public repudiation. Mark's control evaporated like steam. He tried to speak, but there was no command left in his voice. The CEO who had staged my firing now watched his own stage collapse from underneath him. The security team approached the podium, not to remove me but to surround Mark. I'd expected resistance, shouts, legal threats, the last-minute lawyer theatrics. Instead, a uniformed officer read quietly from a ledger. Extra. Mark Leston, you are under investigation for conspiracy to defraud and money laundering. The words landed differently than I expected, not the satisfying clink of chains, but the dull, legalistic slamming of a door. Outside, cameras captured Mark's wife. Hayar, running from the building with a stunned look that would become viral. The humiliation was not theatrical, it was private life spilling, uncontrollably, into public record. Their children's school would not be immune to calls. The comfortable life of dinners and country clubs began to look precarious in an instant. As Mark was escorted away, he turned to me once, eyes blazing with petulant betrayal. Then confusion. For a moment, I saw not just the man who'd betrayed me, but the frightened child he'd been when he first took over this company. The sight did not soften me. It finished me. The press made the rest of the day a carousel. Interviews, stock analyses, legal opinions. I sat with Margaret later in the afternoon in the car, my hands folded over the folder that had begun the unspooling. She squeezed my hand. No victory speeches. No gloating. The silence between us was dense with everything I'd lost and everything I'd stopped from being taken. At 6:02 p.m., the market closed. Leston Dynamics' share price had plunged. Investors would bleed, people would lose pensions. I had not wanted to ruin livelihoods, but neither had I wanted thieves protected. From the edges of the chaos, messages came. Friends, former employees, journalists with kinder questions. And a single, cold text from a number I had once trusted. Mark. You've ruined us. I read it twice, then set the phone down. He was right in a way I didn't expect. He had ruined us. Himself, his family, the company's clean story. But he had also revealed the price of betrayal. The 950M dream, the handshake that should have secured legacies, had been only a facade propped on greed. The collapse had taken 3 days, but the rot had been there months, years. That night, as I walked home beneath the indifferent city lights, the applause from my public firing still echoed in my ears. This time, the applause was different. Less for me than for the truth. I had not staged a revenge. I had set a counterbalance. When power masks crime, someone has to lift the veil. And in the quiet before sleep, I felt the old, painful thing soften into something else. The knowledge that what I'd done would not put my years back together, but it might stop a deeper theft of other lives. The sting of betrayal would remain. Scar tissue, not the whole wound. Tomorrow, the fallout would start to be catalogued. There would be hearings, resignations, lawsuits that would claw through years of conveniently forgotten decisions. But the immediate work was done. Mark had been unmasked. The merger had imploded. The market had collapsed. The man who'd fired me in front of everyone was now the one leaving in disgrace. As I turned the corner toward home, a headline on a passerby's phone scrolled by like a benediction. CEO arrested. Door 950mm deal collapses. I breathed in the night like a man who'd been underwater for too long, finally allowed to surface. Somewhere between the humiliation and the vindication, a life had been rearranged forever. I knew the reckoning wasn't over. But for the first time in weeks, the future felt like mine to decide. The days after the collapse moved like heavy, unstoppable machinery, slow, loud, and irreversible. News cycles devoured the story. Corporate titan falls, CDO arrested for fraud. $950 million merger in ruins. My name appeared in passing footnotes. Whistleblower. Former senior executive. Longtime employee fired during staff meeting. For 32 years, my life had been tied to Leston Dynamics like oxygen to lungs. Now, that company existed only as a carcass on every news channel. It should have felt empty. It didn't. It felt clean. Mark spent the first 72 hours after his arrest surrounded by lawyers and damage control specialists, all promising to mitigate exposure. But Triarch's investigation and federal regulators moved faster than anyone anticipated. The paper trail was undeniable. The shell companies, the dummy transactions, the recorded calls. Every stitch of deceit we'd exposed began to tighten around him like a steel net. By the end of the week, Leston Dynamics board had voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. Within days, his personal accounts were frozen. His face, once framed under soft lighting on magazine covers, became a mugshot across the evening news. Mark had always lived for appearances. He'd built his empire on trust, image, and dominance. Watching his name trend under Cy Lestonleys must have felt like being flayed alive in public. But poetic justice doesn't always wear handcuffs. Sometimes, it comes dressed in silence. When his wife filed for divorce and his eldest son publicly denounced him in a financial ethics forum, Mark's collapse was complete. The family dinners he flaunted in company newsletters, the mansion photo spreads in Forbes Lifestyle, all gone. In a poetic twist, the home he bought with stolen merger money was seized to repay defrauded investors. Mark Leston, the man who fired me in front of hundreds of employees to prove his dominance, was now reduced to a cautionary tale for business schools. The CEO who ignored the accountant. A Triarch publicly thanked the anonymous whistleblower team for bringing integrity back to corporate negotiations. Dana, ever the calm strategist, turned down media appearances, but accepted a quiet consulting role for the Securities Commission. Priya and Jamal, our silent soldiers, were reinstated and promoted within the transition firm that took over Leston's liquidation process. They sent me messages that simply said, "We made it out clean." I didn't return to the office. There was no office left. The Leston headquarters, once a temple of innovation, was now an empty shell, auctioned off for debt recovery. The marble lobby where I'd been fired in front of my colleagues now echoed with the sound of auctioneers calling bids. The irony was sharp enough to taste. One evening, I parked outside that building. I didn't go in, I just sat there, watching the reflection of the "for lease" sign flicker against the empty glass facade. 32 years of my life had been spent inside those walls. Late nights, missed birthdays, broken promises to my wife before she passed, all for a company that had replaced loyalty with greed. But in that hollow space, something unexpected filled the silence: peace. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a business ethics seminar at the university I once couldn't afford to attend. I didn't go as a hero. I went as a lesson. The auditorium was packed. Cameras rolled again, but this time, not to humiliate me. To listen. I spoke not about revenge or vindication, but about the cost of silence. How, in corporate halls where deceit is dressed as strategy, good people become complicit by simply keeping quiet. I told them that betrayal doesn't always start with theft. It starts with trust misused. Integrity, I said, isn't a moral ornament. It's armor. And every time you take it off to please someone powerful, you're volunteering to be cut. When I finished, the applause didn't sound like pity. It sounded like belief. Afterward, a student approached me, nervous, notebook in hand, and asked, "Would you ever go back to corporate life?" I smiled, slow and honest. Not as someone's employee. Never again. The forensic accountant, grateful for my role, connected me with an investor coalition forming a new firm. One built on transparency and ethical equity management. They offered me a seat on their advisory board. It wasn't as flashy as being a CEO, but it was dignified. It was real. Dana joined too. We built policies to protect whistleblowers and reward accountability. We didn't name Leston Dynamics in our materials. But every clause, every rule, every ethical safeguard was written with its ghost in mind. And in one last touch of irony, the regulatory body that banned Mark from ever serving on a corporate board again, used my testimony as a key reference. The same man who once said, "You're replaceable, Walter," was now legally declared unfit to replace anyone at all. 3 months later, I received a handwritten envelope, postmarked from a federal detention center. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Walter, you destroyed me. You could have walked away, but you didn't. Why?" Mark, I stared at that single page for a long time before replying. "Mark, I didn't destroy you. I just stopped pretending you were what you claimed to be. The rest, you did on your own." Walter, I never heard from him again. Spring came early that year. One morning I stood on my balcony watching the sunrise spill over the city, its light washing the skyline gold. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing to a meeting or checking an inbox before dawn. My life no longer belonged to someone else's empire. I poured coffee, opened my laptop, and began drafting my book, part memoir, part cautionary tale. Integrity cost me everything, and saved even more. At every chapter was a scar, but every scar was proof I'd healed the right way. The publisher wanted a tagline. I gave them one that made Dana laugh through tears. "Ha fired me in front of everyone. I watched the world fire him back." The final headline about the case came 6 months later. Ex-CEO Mark Leston pleads guilty. Sentenced to 14 years. The same courthouse where he once cut deals with politicians now echoed with the sound of chains as he was led away. Dana sent me the article with no message attached. Just the link. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my desk drawer, under the letter he'd sent me. Justice hadn't been swift, it had been deliberate. That's the thing about time. It doesn't erase betrayal. It just lets it ferment until truth tastes sharper than revenge. If you've made it this far, maybe you've felt it too. The sting of being dismissed, betrayed, humiliated by someone who thought you'd never fight back. If you have, know this silence protects the powerful. Truth dismantles them. Don't rush your revenge. Perfect it. And when you finally get your moment, don't scream. Don't gloat. Just stand there and let their empire collapse under the weight of your truth. Because that's the purest form of justice. Not anger. Not payback. Revelation.